Hi, everyone, and welcome to The Hash, your daily rundown on the greatest and the latest in crypto and culture. My name is Naomi Brockwell. We have Will Foxley, Jen Sanasie, Ben Powers, and Zack, Seward. And I'm going to throw this straight to you, Zack. We're going to be talking about Uniswap to start off with. Some interesting news there. What have we got?
Yeah, a little bit of a behind-the-scenes peek on one of the biggest players in DeFi working with some really big names in fintech. This was announced at the ETHCC conference in Paris, and we learned later a video of the presentation was deleted at Uniswap's request in a nod to the powers of decentralization. A video version of it lived on the interplanetary file system, and I think we have a clip. So let's roll that clip right now.
These are all huge, kind of solvable problems that DeFi is addressing every single day. And Uniswap is super excited to be sort of at the forefront of that. And we're doing a lot of work, actually, to work closely with these kind of consumer, think of them as like consumer financial applications. So you've got like the PayPals and the E-Trades and the Robinhoods of the world. We're trying to put Uniswap and the rest of DeFi sort of right there in those applications that the users are already using so that we can bring the dream of sort of open 100% uptime liquidity to the whole world.
So that right there is Uniswap Labs growth lead Ashley Schapp. She was spilling a little bit of tea about what Uniswap is up to in terms of merging some DeFi backend into the world of fintech. Now, we asked everyone involved in this story for comment. They all stonewalled us. They said, no, we don't want to talk, or they just didn't reply. And then when the story went live, Hayden Adams, that guy right there, the founder of Uniswap, tweeted some details saying that, hey, yep, sorry, we don't have any partnerships with these folks. We requested the video be taken down so not to misrepresent the early stage conversations that are ongoing. So just an interesting little behind the scenes peek at how it's getting done. But I think it speaks to the broader interest in the crypto market from mainstream players. And of course, sort of a growing awareness of what DeFi might be able to do at a mainstream level. I'm going to throw this straight to Will. Will, a little bit, again, behind the scenes peek at what Uniswap is doing. What are your thoughts on what ended up being an interesting little story yesterday?
I think it's the future for Uniswap. You know, they're a $1 billion plus vehicle for trading any kind of asset or token on the Ethereum network. And they're even bridging that with adding some other tokens like wrapped Bitcoin, or even there's like some stable coins that you can trade that are backed by gold. So kind of like merging into securities land there, which was a conversation topic last week when their front portal blocked access to some tokens. Of course, you can always access those tokens on the backside if you wish to. But going back to just even earlier in the year, I remember talking with Dan Robinson, who was a co-writer of the Uniswap white paper and the Uniswap V3 white paper. And he said that Uniswap had been in talks with Coinbase for providing liquidity for some of the larger pools. So for example, if you want to trade Ether and USDC coin, which is like a stable coin backed by the dollar, it's probably better to go to Uniswap and get a price quote from that pool just because of how much liquidity is on the Uniswap protocol. You're going to get a better price at the end of the day if you go to that versus if you go to a centralized exchange like Coinbase. So that same kind of value or proposition holds true if you're trying to buy Ethereum on, say, Robinhood. Well, it's probably better to get a better price quote just from Uniswap. And that's what all this DeFi kind of stuff is. In the backside, at some point, it's really going to be the rails for interacting with the financial economy. It doesn't always have to be a front-facing part. Uniswap can be behind the scenes, the plumbing and the pipe of the financial economy. But Zach, I want to throw it back to you. Interesting to see that they didn't want to comment on this. Obviously, these bigger players have a lot of reporting diligence they have to do. Robinhood just IPO'd this morning. So your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just sort of a PR tactic. I think we see it often, right? It's like, let's just stonewall, and then when the story comes out, then we'll have something that we can pick on. And I think that's what happened here. I mean, I think this is a really, really, really interesting story because it does suggest a future in which these are the protocols that power stuff that many millions of people use on a regular basis, right? And they won't even necessarily know that they're interacting with these protocols, just like we don't know what video protocol we're using right now to stream this, or we don't know the specifics of how our email is being sent around the world. If there is a future in which E-Trade, Robinhood, PayPal, or some other people not mentioned in this talk before they, before they should have been mentioned. If that future does come to pass, it's quite interesting for what DeFi represents. And I think it's really interesting to see, again, this sneak peek at conversations that are still in the early stages. Naomi, I saw your hand up. I'm super curious for your take on this one.
Yeah, three things. First thing, a lesson that anything you put on the internet is forever. So be mindful of that, everyone. Second of all, I feel super bad for her because clearly she wasn't meant to mention any talks at all. Probably they're in preliminary talks or something. And so I hope that she didn't really put her foot in it after they asked for the video to be taken down. And now it's like this big story. The video was taken down. That is the news story. And just onto your point, finally, Zach, I agree. We've seen things like maps, interesting other applications, but with DeFi on the back end going on, I think we're going to see more of that. I would love to see things like Uniswap get integrated with other applications that have huge user bases, because the more people we can introduce to the world of DeFi, the better. Obviously, you have these gatekeepers like PayPal and Robinhood, and they're centralized players, but it is a good bridge to introduce people to this other world. And once they understand what they're doing there, then they can start to use other applications for accessing that DeFi world. So super interesting. I really hope that it happens. But Ben, I'll throw to you.
Yeah, I think it's funny, whenever in the world of crypto something gets taken down or deleted, that becomes a story in and of itself. And again, shouts to IPFS for, that being the protocol that this can exist on in a more permanent way. And, shouts to the permaweb in that regard. I think it's really interesting. I think that, we've talked a lot about how kind of we saw this bull run, right? We peaked around 60K. We've been hovering right around 40 now for a little bit. We're in the 30s there for a while. And I think that, we talked about VC valuations really continuing to go up and up and up. And we're seeing all these raises. And I think that this is just another look at why there is kind of this sustained momentum for the crypto economy more generally right now. To me, the flip side of this is, on one hand, the idea of plumbing of the internet is always really fascinating, particularly when you start mixing that with finance. And so that's a really interesting route if Uniswap does start to provide some of that. On the other hand, I think it was super indicative that, even if these are not partnerships, they don't have to be partnerships. Preliminary talks are the preliminary parts of partnerships, though, let's be honest. And so even having talks and engaging with places like Robinhood, like PayPal, that already have huge user bases, I think gives a lot of insight into why we're continuing to see the momentum there is and how big the players are that are dabbling in this. But Zach, I'll toss it back to you to wrap this one.
Yeah, to his credit, Hayden Adams did mention the Streisand effect of the deleted video drawing more attention to it than it had, than it otherwise would have drawn. So it's really interesting. Plus, this is the biggest DEX on Ethereum. Ethereum is turning 6 this week. If this is somehow the future of enterprise blockchain or enterprise DeFi, giant fintechs using DeFi protocols, that could be really interesting. So we'll be watching this story closely in the months and years ahead. Will, I'm tossing it to you. What do you got?
We're going to move to traditional finance really quick in interaction with CBDCs. So Bank of America, second largest bank in the US, based out of Charlotte, North Carolina, issued a research note this week calling central bank digital currencies a more effective payment system than cash. They also said that CBDCs are inevitable. They kind of dove into a few different aspects around CBDCs, which we've gone through on the show a few times, such as private stablecoins versus CBDCs. And you can even get into decentralized finance stablecoins where they're backed by a myriad of assets. So lots of different stablecoins out there. But they're just kind of noting, again, some of the past thoughts around CBDCs. Central banks are all looking at them, but they're all moving very slowly when it comes to CBDCs because they want to be careful with it. Of course, there's always this notion of China kind of pushing ahead a little faster than everyone else with their CBDC. And will that lead to some conversations around the dollar's reserve status? Interesting to see that Bank of America is continuing with this research note. Kind of follows on some other research notes from other banks. They're not shy with this topic. They're more interested than ever. Maybe that's just because we're at in the Bitcoin bull cycle right now. But I want to throw this over to Naomi. Keep seeing a lot of these notes. Has your opinion changed on it at all? Kind of the same? CBDCs, banks, all that stuff? Still evil?
so evil. Let's get to the rhetoric. I mean, their terminology, more effective. They say that it's a more effective payment system than cash. Let's dig into what they mean by more effective. More effective at what, right? More effective at surveillance, more effective at controlling the flow of money, more effective at, freezing accounts. Like, it's more effective at a lot of things. Like, are they saying that it's more effective because it's like quicker and all that? Because they don't really dive into that in this article. I would be very wary of banks talking about these things. Banks ultimately do want a lot of control over your money. Even when they say that they don't have it, they make it very difficult for you to get out your own money. They charge exorbitant fees if you want to move money in ways that they don't agree with. So there are a lot of ways that they try to curtail and guide behavior. And so I think that, it is going to be much more effective for them to do this with digital and programmable money. I think that's absolutely correct. I'm not excited about all of this. I mean, it is interesting that Bank of America is also talking about this, because we've talked about, central bank digital currencies from the central bank point of view around the world, and governments saying that this is something we want. And it's sort of been almost at odds with banks in a way, because if you can have the central bank dealing directly with consumers, you don't really need the banks as this throughput, as these middlemen, and it gives the central banks more control. But a lot of central banks around the world have started to ease concerns of banks by saying, no, we'll make sure that you're made necessary, and don't worry, we'll hold up this cartel that you have, and we'll make sure that it continues. But it's just like interesting to watch this narrative play out, and then to see Bank of America kind of come on board here. But Ben, I'm going to throw to you for your thoughts.
Yeah, I think, the more and more these notes come out, and we see them quite often at this point, they're a fairly regular occurrence, the less and less interested I am in some of them. I think maybe my note here was that, 80% of central banks, according to this research, was looking in some form or experimenting with the idea of a CBDC. So that shows, widespread adoption. But it feels to me like we're increasingly moving towards a future where, I think, to me, the more interesting conversation is the conflict between CBDCs and stablecoins, because that seems to have popped up as at odds with each other. And even you have lawmakers and regulators weighing in on that. But I think we're going to see a future where CBDCs are probably going to exist. Cryptocurrency is going to exist. Stablecoins are going to exist. And it's just a matter of choosing what form of, money you want to engage with in a lot of different ways. And there are going to be costs and trade-offs to that. But I don't see these things as mutually exclusive, even though they are painted, as that in some ways, or CBDCs might overtake crypto for some reason. I think they're fundamentally different entities. And as more information comes out about that, people are just going to have to make choices and act accordingly.
I agree with Naomi. When I read the article, I was like, more effective for who? And I just want to read one sentence from it. So the paper said that CBDC is qualified as money by allowing store of value and being a unit of account and means of exchange, differentiating them from cryptocurrencies that do not meet this criteria, which was interesting to me. I mean, I can think of a few cryptocurrencies that maybe do meet that criteria. But for me, these reports that come out, I think really confuses people who are not engulfed in the industry the same way we are. We can read these with a critical mind, and there are a lot of people out there who are still just really trying to make sense of all of the information that's being flung at them every day. And so it's really unfortunate that reports come out like this, and it could change someone's mind on using crypto in the future, and maybe make them only see one side of the coin when it comes to CBDCs.
I mean, look, I can spend my Doge at Burger King in Brazil, so I don't know what they're talking about there.
Just to wrap up the conversation there, I think it's interesting to look at our last story and see Uniswap becoming the plumbing for these active financial products. And then you have CBDCs that are planning still and thinking about what they want to do. There's very two different worlds going on here right next to each other.
Yeah, absolutely. It's central bank digital currencies, man. I am not looking forward to this at all. So if you are watching, you're a newbie, as Jen said, you're trying to figure this out. Yeah, just take this stuff with a grain of salt and realize that this could be a very slippery slope to get us away from cash, which is really, the most popular anonymous form of payment for everyday people who want to maintain their right to financial privacy. But let's go to the break. Let's take a break from this, decompress from central bank digital currencies. Zack, what do we got next?
We got IRAs and Bitcoin mining and I'm just very confused. Like, I just want to know more about this thing, but there's something where like you
Same.
can mine Bitcoin into your IRA. It's all crazy. I don't know. We'll talk about it after
I
the
hear we're
break.
going to get an inside scoop.
I hope so. I hope someone can shed some light, but I'm not holding my breath.
Only we have
Stick
an
with
expert
us.
on the show.
It's the break of the hash, and we'll be back after it. Thanks.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to The Hash. We're going to start off this block by talking about Bitcoin mining and IRAs and taxable events and all of that. So apparently, Compass Mining is enabling clients to mine Bitcoin without triggering a taxable event. Normally, when you mine Bitcoin in the US, it's considered Schedule 1 income, like normal income. But then if you then go to sell your Bitcoin, then you have to pay capital gains. So there are two taxable events to keep in mind with this. Compass Mining says, hey, in our partnership with Choice IRA, which is a crypto-friendly retirement offering by a digital asset custodian, Kingdom Trust, they're saying if you just send that Bitcoin straight to us, you don't get taxed on it at all. I want to dig into the details of this. So I'm going to throw to Will, who actually is our Compass Mining representative on the show. So your editorial director of Compass Mining, Will, so walk us through this. How is this a non-taxable event by going through their partnership with Kingdom Trust?
Yeah, so there's the disclosure, work at Compass. So just some information on the ground level here. What this product does is enables you to defer taxes just in a similar way that if you take income in your normal 401k during a regular year, like from your salary, you defer taxes on that, push that to the end. And so if you take money out of your 401k traditionally, like you'll get taxed on that if you break it early. But if you push it aside, save using a 401k, then you're saving on taxes, not having to pay those. It's the same thing here with Bitcoin mining. Essentially, you buy a Bitcoin miner from Compass, and then you put all that money that Bitcoin that the Bitcoin miner earns, and it goes to this 401k account or this IRA account rather, and then you're tax deferred through that vehicle. Bitcoin mining, typically you get taxed twice, which is just kind of like a downside of being in the space. You get taxed when you create the Bitcoin as income, and then you also get, we got a finger on the show. What's up, Zack?
I got a question. So wait, Compass sends me an actual hardware rig, or I'm just like renting a rig on like a server rack somewhere in the world? How does that work?
Yeah, so there's typically two different ways that you can mine Bitcoin if you're a retail miner. There's cloud mining, and then there's hardware access. Cloud mining is pretty difficult to do, and it's like historically not always the best business model to be in because there's a lot of risks from not owning the asset yourself. Compass does hardware access. So if you want to buy Bitcoin miner, you own it, you have the serial number, it's an asset on your books, and you can actually tax defer it, depreciate it over the years. So that's what this does. You buy a physical Bitcoin miner, like the one behind me, and you host it in like yourself or in your own facility or one of Compass's facilities, and bam, you have a Bitcoin miner on your books that earns real Bitcoin.
I have another question.
There's an actual device involved somewhere along the line. Got it. Okay. I got you. Yeah,
that magic internet money, Zack.
That helps me understand. Thank you. Naomi, all you.
So normally with an IRA, I think it's like $6,000 a year that you can put into it. So is that included in this, or is this on top of the 6,000 limit that we have?
So what do you mean more specifically, like when you're buying the miner itself or per year? It just follows like the typical guidelines for an IRA through Kingdom Trust.
So you're saying that Choice. I can mine Bitcoin, not have a taxable event, right? But I currently have a $6,000 cap on the amount of money per year I can put into an IRA. So the amount that I'm earning through Bitcoin, I'm guessing that's part of that 6,000 that's capped.
Yeah, the thresholds for those things don't change. Unfortunately, I wish you could just mine a ton of Bitcoin and it would go into there.
That would be really
IRAs
nice.
are kind of set up, and yeah, that'd be pretty really sick, nice. Wouldn't it? But
Dude,
yeah,
Will, you should hire like you should hire like the ShamWow guy to do like infomercials for Compass Mining. Like get the ShamWow guy on, and then he would do like ShamWow for like mining IRA, because that would be sweet. We should do that next time. I think the bigger stuff around like Bitcoin mining and like sort of like tax implications, I think is super interesting, right? Like, you know, this is still something that is not super duper efficient in the U.S. tax under U.S. tax regime. So the idea that this is a creative solution, I think, stands out to me as sort of a bigger picture idea that's worth homing in on. I'll toss it to Naomi if you want to close it out.
I just have one more question. So I'm presuming that this is a traditional IRA, not a Roth IRA. And so Compass is sort of acting as like the employer in this case, putting it directly into the IRA. Is that how it works?
From my understanding, it is just a typical IRA, not a Roth IRA. And we're working through 3 different partners. Choice, which has a lot of different products than just this Bitcoin mining one. They have a lot of different ways for putting Bitcoin into portfolio for retirement. And then Kingdom Trust as well, which I believe is like the fiduciary behind all of it.
Nice.
Cool.
Well done. Way
All
with the Peter Thiel Roth IRA pump.
Yo, that was a good thread. I read that the other day. Yes, like Peter Thiel made his.
I missed that.
Peter Thiel's super rich because he invested through his IRA, so it's all like tax.
He turned a $2,000 Roth IRA into like $5 billion. It's wild.
Yeah, he like invested in like Facebook through his IRA. Or
Wow.
something. Anyway,
yeah, it's again the U.S. tax code
man.
working for its citizens.
Anyway,
No, that's exactly what the tax code is. I mean, there are too many laws in the tax code for any single person to even know. So the fact that people are figuring out how to work this and they're actually doing it by the law and within the confines of the law and finding all the legal ways to make money, I think is great. I applaud it. But Jen, let's move on and talk about crypto users.
Before I move on, Will, did I see that you tweeted the other day that your mom mines?
Both my parents mine Bitcoin.
Oh
So,
my God, that's cool.
We are a
What a
proud
cool
stacking
family you
family.
have.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I have to. Yes, I need to relay that Control is roasting Will in the chat with a picture of the ShamWow guy. So late breaking news. Late breaking news from the CoinDesk TV room.
I'm all about it.
You're good. You're good, man.
Sure,
Well, I assume
sure.
you help with the
Can we
TV
get that on
remotes
screen?
too. You know.
Yeah, no, anyway,
Jen,
continue.
All right,
don't
all
move
right.
us away from this.
Yeah. Let's keep it
Chaos.
moving. All right. So new data suggests that crypto users and user numbers doubled in the first half of the year. Crypto.com used on-chain data and other parameters to compile the number from 24 of the largest crypto platforms. So they found that the number of global crypto users reached 221 million in June, which is exciting. I mean, this is really exciting news. We talk about mainstream adoption. When I read this, I thought this is really awesome for the first half of the year, but now we're starting to hear a lot from the regulators worldwide. And I wonder if this is going to scare people off. And I wonder what we're going to see with this number. So Zach, I'm going to kick this one right off to you. What did you take away from this report? Do you think we're going to see that number keep going up?
My takeaway from the report is that large numbers are highly attractive to people who want to learn about this space, right? Traffic numbers for crypto media publications, user numbers, they kind of run in parallel to the Bitcoin price. And it's really striking to see this time and time again, cycle and cycle again. So to me, that was sort of the thing that popped to my mind. But let me shake my head a little bit and see if another thought comes to mind. No, I'm going to toss to Ben. Ben, what do you got?
Yeah, I think that, this kind of makes sense in terms of the overall users, right? More people, they have FOMO, they want to get in on this. I think this, I think NFTs would also be a part of this driver in terms of the amount of attraction that we saw with mainstream figures and crossover. I'm really curious about how sticky this number is going to be, right? Like how many people actually stay and actually explore more in the crypto space, or how many people are like, oh, I bought this one NFT and then the price went down and then I just kind of forgot my OpenSea password and now I'm just like out of this entirely. Because I think that might be more the case than like people doing this for large scale adoption. Obviously, we had some people kind of like YOLO into Dogecoin and stuff like that, but that to me is more interesting. The overall numbers of usage aren't really the headliner here. I'm like more curious about what coins people are getting into, what the breakdowns of apps are really attracting people, and then how many people are actually going to stick with this over a 6 to 12 month period rather than maybe a 2 month one.
And I think that really I mean, I think that's a great point, Ben. Sorry. I just think that's a great point about sort of crypto adoption cycles, right? There's this big mass of people who become really interested. A large percentage of those people lose interest and go away, but that underlying foundation of rational actors who find the space interesting and stick around grows with each subsequent cycle. So what we see next time around could be really interesting given this data point. Naomi, sorry.
Yeah, I'll just mention that Coinbase actually came out with an interesting statement yesterday. They said that many of their largest institutional clients, including hedge funds, endowments, and corporates, increased or added first-time exposure to ETH in Q1, believing that the asset has long-term staying power tantamount to Bitcoins. So it's just interesting to see this big growth, interesting to see a lot of people diversifying and starting to look at all the different assets in the ecosystem, starting with ETH, obviously being like the number two, but I thought that was an interesting thing that they were just some insider perspective from Coinbase's point of view. But Will, I'll throw to you.
Yeah, I'm wondering if this number is too low, actually. So there was a report, I forget who was by recently, but they said 46 million Americans have Bitcoin. So I mean, that's a large swath of your 220 million worldwide, right? And so there's a lot of people on Earth, right? So I'm wondering if it's bigger. Maybe this Crypto.com research was only in the US. Apologies, and someone can correct me if that's correct.
Well, they did say it was global, but they focused on 24 exchanges. So
yeah, so I feel like it could even be quite larger, just some sort of exposure. And I think Zach's comment there is prescient to like what the space is like. There's always like these big cycles concluding with the price where it goes up and people come in and then the price goes down. Some people stay, some people leave, and we get bigger every single time we go around the merry-go-round. So I have a feeling, though, it is larger, though, just based on some other surveys that we've seen.
There are a lot of people on Earth, and some of those people live in Iran. And the Iranian legislature is moving forward with a bill to kind of further internet censorship there. This is according to local reports. And this bill has been in development for, it looks like, a number of years, but it's just sort of continuing to churn forward. And it has a couple of different implications. So obviously, social media and some websites in Iran have been censored for a while now, Facebook and others. One that is not, though, has been Instagram. And there have been some filters put on it, but, as part of this bill, seemingly a social media company would have to have a representative in the country itself who would have to be accountable to that. And also a lot of businesses use Instagram in Iran to kind of further their own things. So it seems that in part because it's highly unlikely, I would imagine, that Facebook is going to put a U.S. citizen or representative in Iran to be held accountable for Instagram's actions, that this could become the latest sort of site that gets more fully censored in Iran. And this is coming amid roiling protests over things like water shortages, mishandling of COVID, and a variety of other things. So there's a lot to be tied into here. But, Instagram was the one sort of social media site you could use without having to use a VPN, which is, if you do, puts you subject to potential jail time and or fines. And that seems to be a little bit at risk now. So, Jen, I want to toss this one to you for your initial thoughts.
You know what? I'm going to pass this on to Naomi because I want to hear her initial thoughts on this, and then I'm going to take it back. Okay?
Oh, okay.
Take it back. All right.
Like it, direct handoff.
I mean, I just think it gets really scary when you start looking at this. It's always nice for us to get perspective in the United States by seeing these things happen in other countries so that we know what to look out for, right? So you say like all of the ways that they use, the reasons they give to justify these censorship of platforms. They say, well, it's offensive material. It's targeting religious and cultural beliefs. But when you actually look into it, they're actually censoring political opponents. They're censoring media outlets that don't have the correct opinion. It's just a very scary slope. And we can look at places as a third party, like Iran, and say, well, that's terrible. The people, they have no freedom of speech. It's completely controlled. There's complete control of the media by the government. But it's not the only place in the world where this happens. And a lot of this stuff does happen in the US to a lesser extent. And it's just worthwhile being cognizant of like the propaganda and the way that they phrase these things of, we don't want to offend anyone and all of this, just to know, like what the slippery slope of anti-free speech sentiment looks like. So that's something that I will just mention. And, there are other ways that governments can also censor rather than just outright banning platforms. They also mentioned that, there are internet outages, slowdowns. This happens a lot in India as well. Every time like there's some sort of civil unrest, they will shut off the internet. I have a friend who lives there and she's like, yeah, the internet's out like every other week. They'll just shut it off in a certain area because they don't want people to be able to communicate. And I think they've really found that pressure point, that place to leverage in society. People use the internet. They rely on it to communicate, to network, to build force and opposition and protest and all of this. And then the government's like, okay, so we'll just shut down the internet. So it's kind of, there are lots of different ways that they can do this. And it's a little scary, but I'll throw it back to you, Jen.
I think, okay, so here's what I think. I think in governments, many governments, not just the Iranian government's attempts to control their populations, they are pushing them more towards decentralized applications and forcing people to look for alternative methods. So as they kind of tighten their grips on people, I think we're being forced into the future. I know I've said that before on the show. And so I think they're just going to end up kicking themselves. I don't think that these laws are going to be effective in the way that governments want them to be. And I think we're going to see people in large groups kind of migrate over to Web3 applications. And I think that's what's going to kind of fuel the mainstream adoption that we talk about a lot on the show. So it's really sad. It's really sad that people are going to have to kind of go through all these technical barriers to access information that should be free for all. But I think for our future, I think it's serving our future. But I'll toss it back to you, Naomi.
Yeah, I think, Ben, you had your hand up first, and then I'll go.
And Will, you put your hand up. So Will, then me, then we'll go back to
number
Naomi.
Number one.
We're so kind to each other.
I'm going to take a slightly different approach than what you said, Jen. I think that Iran and similar countries show the promise of decentralized tech, but I think they also show the onus that it's on people who are making decentralized tech right now. Like, this is the reason why we need decentralized finance, or why we need decentralized 100%. Tech in general, because there's these countries that do not allow people to have those freedoms. And inevitably, all governments over time tend towards those same kind of purposes. Like, that's what they do. They tend towards being more extreme. And so I think that shows why we need these things and why developers are building them and why people are really, really passionate about Bitcoin. That's why people think of Bitcoin sometimes as a religion or a pseudo religion, because they see places like Iran where you don't have access to these things and everything is arbitrarily cut off. There's no political freedoms at all. And so, I mean, I don't think that in Iran, to be honest, is going to be like a growing place for the Web3 right now. Why? Because they don't have internet access most of the time. Where it's going to come out of, I hope, is places like San Francisco, where they're like building these things up and then they're able to push them globally afterwards and kind of like free those places from the outside in.
I think there's like a much larger question. I don't think there's going to be like a mass migration at any time soon. I think these are the instances that put the kernels of the ideas in people's brains about why this tech is necessary. I think the tech is still a long way from actually being there quite often, particularly in a case like this. Like, when we talk about decentralization, I think it's really hard to fully conceptualize what that looks like, given the world we live in incredibly centralized silos, because like to access, decentralized apps or things like that, you need the internet. Who controls the internet? ISPs. Who do ISPs bend to? The government of the country they're in, and things like that. I mean, part of the reason there are areas without broadband access in the US is because of lobbying from telecoms companies and stuff. So there's all these different barriers and silos that have to get broken down before, you could start building out a mesh network that could help with like access around decentralized webs, right? And unfortunately, like, people are interested in, keeping hegemonies on power where they do control it. So those are some of the barriers I see to all this, but like, these are the reasons that these conversations even occur. And I think they can point us towards re-envisioning and flipping the kind of worldview from one of centralized to decentralization, while also illuminating the challenges that come with that.
Yeah, I just want to get to the future wrap here. So I'll just mention, like,
let's talk.
Anyway, just to go back to my point from before, I just want to mention that this is one of the reasons why I don't scoff at things like the Blockstream satellite. I think that, a lot of people are like, what does it even do? But I'm like, well, finding redundancy in internet is actually a really good thing. I like that more people are exploring this and having, beacons up there that can't be shut down. And I think that's kind of interesting. And the other thing I'll just mention is part of wording from the bill, which I found terrifying, where it says that the control of the country's internet bandwidth must be handed over to the armed forces, while the methodology for deciding what constitutes data privacy must be devised by the intelligence ministry in cooperation with the armed forces. So you have the government deciding, like, what's data privacy, and the citizens get no say in this, which is, it was terrifying. But Zach,
wait till I tell you about regulated encryption.
Take it home.
Yeah. I'm going to shut you down. All right, guys, we got to wrap it. That's the show for today. I'm off tomorrow, and I'm off next week. I'm going to miss you guys next week.
Oh, man.
I'm not going to hang out with you every day.
We're going to miss you
I'll be
too.
back the week after that. So I hope it works out. I hope we get a
vacay.
lot of Steve. We'll see how it goes. I'm Zach. We got Naomi, Ben, Jen, and Will. I hope all of them are here next week to guide this wonderful ongoing conversation about this wonderful industry that we cover. So stick with us. It's The Hash. CoinDesk.com is here for you 24/7. We'll talk to you soon, I hope. And have a great weekend if you're starting early like me. All right, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.